You ever think you know someone, only to discover their world is nothing like yours? Imagine being a teenager, walking through life, feeling the weight of your circumstances, and suddenly being thrown into a storm that you never saw coming. That's exactly what happened to her. She was quiet, humble, always keeping her head down, but somehow her life was about to collide with a world she never imagined, one filled with wealth, privilege, and a type of cruelty that most people only read about. It all started on a sunny morning at the school courtyard. Kids were laughing, chatting, and walking in clusters, sharing secrets, swapping snacks, and enjoying the freedom of youth. But amidst all the laughter, there was one girl who didn't belong, or at least, that's what the rich kids made her feel. She wore old, simple clothes, the kind that didn't shine under the fluorescent lights of popularity. Her backpack was patched up, her shoes scuffed, and her lunch barely noticeable against the trays of gourmet sandwiches and smoothies carried by others. She tried to stay invisible, to move quietly through the halls, but fate has a funny way of making the invisible painfully visible. He was the richest kid in school, popular, arrogant, untouchable. His blazer always perfectly pressed, his hair flawless, his every step watched by envious eyes. And he had a habit of picking targets, of asserting his dominance over anyone who didn't fit into his perfect little world. He noticed her that day, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was different. And when someone is different in his eyes, it's fair game. The bullying began subtly at first. Little jabs, sarcastic comments, whispered insults. As she passed by, at first she ignored it, hoping it would fade. But the rich kid's attention was persistent, cruel, almost calculated. Soon it became public humiliation. Notes slipped into her locker, her hair pulled during class, tripping in the hallways while others laughed. Each day it escalated. And the thing about high school cruelty is this: it's relentless and it always finds a new way to humiliate. But she wasn't alone in her suffering. Some classmates whispered apologies, others looked away, afraid to intervene. And yet, despite the fear, despite the embarrassment, she never retaliated. There was a quiet dignity in her silence, a strength, in the way she held herself even when tears threatened to spill. But the rich kid didn't notice strength. He only saw weakness, a challenge that needed to be conquered. Then came the day that would change everything. The cafeteria was buzzing louder than usual, a sea of bodies moving around, trays clattering, voices overlapping. The rich kid decided to make his most public statement yet. He snatched her lunch, tossing it across the room, laughing as everyone stared. She froze for a moment, humiliated, embarrassed beyond words. And then something strange happened. A silence fell, almost imperceptible, but powerful. People stopped laughing, eyes turned. Phones were out, capturing the moment for everyone online. The situation had escalated to a point where it could no longer be ignored. Just as the rich kid was about to deliver another crushing insult, the doors of the cafeteria burst open. A man stepped in, tall, imposing, and with an air of authority that immediately shifted the room's energy. All eyes turned to him. The rich kid's laughter faltered, his confidence wavering ever so slightly. The girl, stunned, barely breathed. There was something familiar, something she couldn't quite place. This man didn't just look powerful, he exuded presence. Every step he took commanded attention, every glance carried an unspoken warning. And as he walked toward the table, where the rich kid had been humiliating her, whispers spread like wildfire. Teachers, students, even bystanders felt the tension. No one knew exactly who he was, but everyone could sense the storm about to break. When he reached her, the girl's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't seen him in years, hadn't even known where he was. And suddenly he was there, protective, authoritative, undeniable. The rich kid, for the first time that day, hesitated. He tried to maintain his smug expression, but there was an edge of fear, a realization that his playground tactics were about to meet real consequences. "You've been hurting her," the man said, his voice calm but cutting through the noise like a knife. The richness of his tone, the strength behind his words, demanded obedience. And in that moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The girl's peers stared in disbelief. Teachers watched, unsure how to intervene, and the rich kid? He swallowed, finally understanding that power isn't measured by money or popularity. It's measured by who stands beside you when the world is against you. The revelation that followed was even more shocking. The girl's hand trembled slightly as she whispered, almost to herself, almost afraid to hope, "Father?" The man nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at her. He had arrived unexpectedly, but with perfect timing, reshaping everything she had endured. Her real father, someone she had never known, someone who had been absent in the hardest moments, was here now, and his presence alone was enough to change the entire dynamic of the school, of the cafeteria, of the way everyone had treated her. The rich kid's arrogance evaporated. His cruel smirk vanished, replaced by a nervous tension he had never felt before. What had been a daily torment, a constant stream of humiliation, suddenly had a new witness, a new authority figure who would not tolerate injustice. Students whispered among themselves, phones captured every detail, and the entire social hierarchy shifted in an instant. For the girl, the world seemed to tilt, but in a good way. Relief flooded through her veins, tears threatening, but for the first time she felt seen, protected, and validated. It wasn't just about stopping the bullying, it was about reclaiming power, reclaiming dignity, and finally knowing she wasn't alone, and that moment, the first step toward justice, was only the beginning. The story doesn't end with the cafeteria scene. It continues in classrooms, in hallways, and in the quiet moments afterward, as she learns what it truly means to have someone by your side, someone who will stand up for you no matter what. That presence, that sudden intervention changes everything, not just for her, but for anyone who has ever felt powerless in the face of cruelty. By the time the lunch period ended, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The rich kid walked away, embarrassed and subdued, while the girl stayed seated, feeling an unfamiliar sense of safety and hope. Students glanced at her differently now, some with newfound respect, others with curiosity. But for her, the lesson was clear. Even in the darkest moments, help can arrive when you least expect it. And true strength doesn't come from wealth or popularity. It comes from love, protection, and standing up for what's right. And as she left the cafeteria that day, walking beside the father she had never known, there was a quiet power in her step, a new confidence that no amount of bullying could ever erase. She had survived the storm, but more importantly, she had discovered that some battles, no matter how impossible they seem, can be won when the right person shows up at the right time. The cafeteria had gone quiet, but the tension in the air was far from over. The rich kid, for the first time, realized that his wealth and status were no longer enough to protect him from consequences. Every sneer, every whisper of laughter he had relied upon now faltered in the presence of her father. But arrogance dies hard, and he wasn't ready to back down without a fight. "You think showing up makes you untouchable?" he muttered under his breath, glaring at the man beside. The girl, there was a spark of defiance, but it was weak, flickering against the confidence that radiated from her father. Students watched, some holding their phones, others frozen in anticipation. The dynamic of the room had changed completely. Yet the rich kid refused to surrender gracefully. The girl's father didn't need to raise his voice. Every step he took, every measured glance, communicated authority. He didn't just stand up for her. He embodied protection, control, and unspoken power. The rich kid fidgeted, realizing that this was no ordinary school confrontation. This wasn't about petty teasing anymore. It was a reckoning. But even with her father there, the emotional toll on the girl was heavy. Weeks of subtle humiliation had left scars, quiet moments where she questioned herself, wondered if she deserved this treatment, and feared speaking up. The bullying hadn't just been public. It had invaded her sense of self. Yet now, with someone finally on her side, she could feel a new strength building. A strength she hadn't recognized in herself until now. Her father knelt slightly to meet her eye level. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, voice firm but tender. She nodded, though her hands shook. Relief and residual fear collided inside her chest. The rich kid's attempts at dominance, once overwhelming, now seemed fragile and empty. His wealth, his status, his friends, none of it mattered against the presence of someone who truly cared. As the day progressed, word spread quickly. Teachers, students, even the principal had caught wind of the confrontation. By the next class, whispers circulated, not of ridicule, but of astonishment. How had this quiet, unassuming girl, so often overlooked and bullied, suddenly become the center of attention for an entirely new reason? Some watched with envy, others with curiosity, but everyone was aware that something profound had shifted. The rich kid tried to maintain a facade of control. He forced a smile, muttered empty words, but the students around him sensed the change. The power imbalance had reversed, and as the girl walked beside her father, her head held high, she realized that humiliation was fleeting, but integrity and support could be permanent. Later that afternoon, in the empty halls after classes had dispersed, the girl and her father talked quietly. For the first time she asked questions she had long held inside. Who had he been? Why hadn't he been there? Why now? He explained, carefully and patiently, the circumstances that had kept him away, the misunderstandings and the life he had lived in search of stability. Before returning to her. Each word was a balm to wounds she hadn't realized ran so deep. She began to understand that the cruelty she had endured wasn't her fault. That realization, so simple yet powerful, changed her perspective entirely. She wasn't weak. She hadn't done anything to deserve the ridicule. And now, finally, she had the support she had needed all along. Meanwhile, the rich kid's world was unraveling. Privilege alone could not protect him from the consequences of his actions. He had relied on others' fear and indifference to sustain his superiority, and now that shield was gone. Witnesses, teachers, and students alike had seen his behavior, and whispers of his arrogance began to follow him through the hallways. Even his closest friends started to question the way he treated others. Realizing the weight of cruelty they had silently condoned. At home that evening, the girl sat with her father, reflecting on the day. It was overwhelming anger, relief, fear, and hope all mixed together in a complex swirl. But there was also clarity. She realized that real strength wasn't about retaliation or proving dominance. It was about knowing when to stand still, when to seek help, and when to accept the support offered by those who genuinely care. The next day at school, things began to shift more subtly but decisively. The rich kid no longer had the same influence over peers. Teachers enforced rules more firmly, and classmates who had previously watched silently now stepped up to support her in small ways. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension and fear, started to feel lighter, as though a long-standing injustice had been corrected, at least partially. Still, the real journey was internal. The girl had faced not only public humiliation but years of self-doubt, isolation, and fear. Overcoming those invisible scars required more than her father's presence. It demanded courage, reflection, and a willingness to reclaim her identity. With each passing hour, she felt more empowered. Each glance, each nod of respect from peers reinforced her confidence. And slowly she began to realize that the person she had been before the bullying, quiet, humble, overlooked, was still there, but stronger, wiser, and ready to face life with resilience. Meanwhile, the rich kid learned a critical lesson. Arrogance and wealth do not equate to power when confronted with accountability and moral courage. He tried to navigate the new dynamics, but subtle gestures and glances from classmates reminded him that his reign of casual cruelty had ended. The social hierarchy he had once ruled was no longer intact, and he was forced to adapt. The tension, while still present, had transformed. No longer was it about fear or intimidation. It became a test of growth and accountability. The girl, once a target, now moved through the school with a new aura. She wasn't seeking revenge, but she carried an unmistakable presence, one forged in adversity and solidified by the unexpected arrival of someone who truly valued her. By the end of Part 2, the foundation for the ultimate resolution was set. The girl had survived the immediate storm. The rich kid had been humbled, and her father's arrival had permanently altered the balance of power. Yet the final confrontation, the full understanding of justice and recognition still loomed ahead. There were conversations to be had, accountability to be enforced, and the rich kid would eventually face the consequences of his repeated actions. And as she prepared for the coming days, walking through hallways she once feared, she carried with her a simple but profound truth. Strength isn't about fighting alone, it's about standing firm, seeking help when needed, and reclaiming your dignity no matter how high the odds seem. The days following her father's dramatic entrance were intense, but nothing could have prepared the rich kid for what came next. Word of his actions had spread far beyond the cafeteria. Teachers had filed reports, students had shared footage online, and even the principal had begun to scrutinize his behavior. No amount of wealth or arrogance could shield him from accountability anymore. For the girl, each day brought a mix of relief and anxiety. The bullying had stopped in some ways, but the shadow of what she endured lingered in quiet moments. The hallways she once feared, the whispers she could still hear, the moments when she doubted herself. Her father stayed by her side, offering guidance, encouragement, and protection, but he also encouraged her to face the situation on her own terms. Strength, he reminded her, was something she already possessed. It was just buried beneath years of fear and humiliation. Then came the confrontation that would define everything. The rich kid, emboldened by a mix of shame and lingering arrogance, attempted to assert himself once more. He approached her in the hallway, trying to make a remark, a joke, something that would reassert his dominance. But this time, the reaction was different. Her confidence, bolstered by her father's support and her own inner growth, radiated from her posture, her calm gaze, and her controlled tone. "I'm done being afraid of you," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undeniable edge. "Your money, your popularity, none of that scares me anymore. You've humiliated me for months, but this stops here." The rich kid faltered, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of fear and disbelief. For the first time, he realized that the girl he had tormented for so long was no longer the same person. The power he thought he had was illusory. It had never been about him, it had always been about how he treated others. And in that moment, he finally understood the weight of his actions. The principal arrived shortly after, informed by witnesses and video evidence of previous incidents. The rich kid was called into the office, confronted with the consequences of his repeated bullying. Detention, behavioral counseling, and a strict warning were issued. For the first time, he was forced to see the reality of his behavior and the impact it had on the girl's life. Meanwhile, the girl walked back to her father, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. She had faced the storm, survived the humiliation, and come out stronger than ever. But the real victory wasn't punishment for the rich kid, it was reclaiming her dignity, confidence, and sense of self. She had learned that true power doesn't lie in wealth, popularity, or intimidation. It lies in standing up for yourself and having people who genuinely care by your side. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to a semblance of normal. Hallways that once felt suffocating became spaces she could navigate without fear. Friends, old and new, noticed the change in her demeanor. Quiet confidence replaced timidity, and a subtle aura of resilience surrounded her. Her father remained a supportive presence, but he allowed her the space to navigate school life independently, guiding her only when necessary. The rich kid's attitude shifted too. The experience had humbled him, forced him to reflect on the consequences of his actions. While his wealth and status remained, they no longer defined him in the eyes of his peers. He had to rebuild respect the right way through behavior, accountability, and understanding, not through fear or intimidation. One afternoon, she stood in the school courtyard, sunlight filtering through the trees, watching students laugh and move through their routines. She remembered how isolated she had felt just weeks before, the weight of ridicule pressing down on her shoulders. But now, surrounded by the ordinary rhythm of school life, she realized something profound: survival alone is not enough. Thriving, regaining your power, and standing tall after trauma, that is true victory. Her father approached, smiling gently. "I'm proud of you," he said. And she understood that his pride was not about his presence alone, it was about recognizing her courage, her growth, and her ability to face adversity with strength and dignity. The story of the rich teen bullying a poor girl became more than just a tale of cruelty, it became a lesson in resilience, justice, and the power of support. Other students, inspired by what they had witnessed, began to rethink their own actions and attitudes. Quiet whispers of change spread through the school, small acts of kindness replacing moments of cruelty. One incident had sparked a subtle revolution, reminding everyone that empathy, courage, and integrity could overcome arrogance and intimidation. In the end, the girl's journey was about far more than standing up to one bully. It was about reclaiming her life, learning to trust others again, and understanding that true strength comes from within. Her father's unexpected arrival was the catalyst, but her victory was ultimately her own. She had faced the impossible, confronted fear, and emerged with a sense of self that no one could shake. And as she walked home that day, the sun casting long golden shadows on the streets, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had endured humiliation, fear, and isolation, but she had also discovered courage, love, and resilience. The rich kid, humbled by consequences and the weight of his own actions, would remember this lesson for years to come. The moral of the story was clear: life can throw unexpected storms your way, and those storms often feel insurmountable. But when you stand firm, seek support, and refuse to let fear dictate your actions, you can overcome even the harshest trials. Bullies, cruelty, and arrogance may try to dominate, but integrity, courage, and the right support will always prevail. The time she reached home, the girl knew one thing for certain. She had not only survived the cruelty of her peers, but she had grown stronger because of it. The unexpected arrival of her father had changed her life forever, but the real triumph was discovering the power that had always been inside her. And as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, she walked forward, confident, resilient, and unafraid, ready to face any challenge life might throw her way, and knowing that no one could ever diminish her worth again.